This is Democracy Watch. Mark, we may actually have some action by Democrats to counter the utter lawlessness by the Supreme Court amid their presidential immunity ruling. Can you speak on the constitutional amendment that was just introduced?
Yeah, so Congressman Joe Morelle, who is a real champion of democracy and voting rights issues in Congress and part of the Democratic leadership team, introduced a constitutional amendment that would do two things. Number one is it would say that the president of the United States is not immune from criminal prosecution for his crimes. The second is it would take away his power to pardon himself for any for any crime. So you might, it is sort of a commentary on where we are in 2024, that this is the constitutional amendment we need, but it is in fact the constitutional amendment we need. So kudos to Congressman Morelle for introducing this. And it is something that, frankly, everyone who has common sense, I won't even say cares about democracy, anyone who has a modicum of common sense should get behind.
So what is the process for actually getting a constitutional amendment passed?
So, look, this is where, of course, the common sense test runs into trouble, which is that you need 2/3 of both houses of Congress and then 3/4 of the states. So, this would require Republicans in Congress to have common sense, be willing to exercise common sense, and, be willing to say that that presidents who commit felonies should not be immune from criminal prosecution.
Well, can the Supreme Court overrule a constitutional amendment, even on the unlikely chance that it actually does get passed? Would they have the ability to kind of swat it down?
No, they don't, right? So the Supreme Court has the authority to interpret constitutional amendments, but once the amendment is passed, they are in the Constitution. They are part of the text. The Supreme Court cannot invalidate a constitutional amendment. We have seen the Supreme Court interpret some constitutional provisions in ways that I don't think are truly faithful to the text. But when you read this provision, and Democracy Docket has it on their website, they wrote a really good article summarizing, and they posted the actual constitutional text. It's pretty hard to get around. Like, the Supreme Court would not be able to navigate around the way in which Congressman Morelle has framed this.
And to that exact point, again, I would highly recommend checking out Democracy Docket for that article and the rest of the content that's put forward. That is the free news outlet Mark founded to focus on everything voting and elections. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Definitely sign up. You will not regret it. Mark, do you feel like, for example, we will see opposition from Republicans and Republican states to a constitutional amendment like this. Do you believe that that's Trump-centric, and that in the event that Donald Trump loses in November and hopefully is out of the political conversation moving forward, that they will come around to this idea that, okay, we probably shouldn't have presidential immunity, and also we shouldn't allow a president to pardon himself or herself? Or do you think that this will be a prevailing theme among Republicans, because whoever they get in, they're going to want to preserve that for the future Republican candidate or president?
I think, Brian, the biggest question facing politics after this election, if Kamala Harris wins, as I suspect she will, is what does the Republican Party do? Does it remain a Trump dominant party? I don't even mean Trump centric. I mean, like, where it is simply continues to be under his grip, so that we are waiting for 2028 for him to make a decision to run again. You laugh, but I mean that. Where he would potentially run again, or he would anoint one of his children to run. At that point, the Republican Party, I suspect, stays Trump dominated. Why? Because I gave the Republican Party the benefit of the doubt once before. And, shame on me that I thought that after he lost in 2020 and was responsible for instigating a violent insurrection in the nation's capital, I actually took at their word the things that the then majority leader of the Senate said, Mitch McConnell, the then Speaker of the House, said about how it was Donald Trump's fault and there would be accountability. And instead, here we are, and he has a firmer grip than ever before. So if it stays a Trump-dominated party, either with him at the top or one of his children or his daughter-in-law, who I know you're a big fan of her record sales or her music, then I think this stays in place, right? Because this is part of Trumpism. If, on the other hand, they were to break free from Trumpism, then I think like a bunch of Republicans would be like, why the hell do we want the president to be immune from criminal prosecution?
Yeah, I feel like there's a world in which we should just have a Democratic president try something, just to say, like, gonna do this unless you all come around and allow common sense to prevail and recognize that a president should not have total control over the U.S. government.
I think we should do that. I think we should also find a way to license Laura Trump's music so that we can include it in future episodes.
Yeah. Well, something tells me it's not going to be too expensive. So, on this issue of presidential immunity, It took some other major wrongs in this country decades to fix, as many as, I believe the longest was 58 years between Dred Scott, Plessy v. Ferguson, Korematsu. Do you think that this wrongly decided issue, and it is wrongly decided, will take decades to fix, or do you think that it'll be remedied sooner?
Look, I think there are three ways it can be fixed. The first is it can be fixed by the constitutional amendment, which makes a lot of sense and can move very fast. I mean, we have had some pretty common sense constitutional amendments move very, very fast in this country. This should be one of those. It's not really that controversial. Number two, it can get changed because the Supreme Court can get another case and can rule otherwise. And that, as you point out, would take a number of things to happen, including a different composition of the Supreme Court, another fact pattern that would come before it, right? That could take decades. The third is that the country breaks free of the cult of Trump. Republicans reject Trumpism, and frankly, norms sort of restore to a place in which presidents don't view themselves as above the law, in which they view themselves through decency in their oath of office as bound to not commit crimes. Any one of those three would be preferable to where we are now. I favor the first because it protects against future tyrants. But where we stand right now, frankly, I would take any of those three over the status quo.
Mark, there is an even more important fix that's gaining traction right now. Senator Markey has advocated for the Judiciary Act, which would add 4 justices and bring the total number on the Supreme Court to 13. To be clear, is the only way to expand the court through congressional action? And if so, is the process the same as just passing any other bill?
Yeah, so I want to take your first question in a second and sort of in the tone and merge them together. Yes, it requires a congressional action, but it only has to be a regular bill, right? So it can be part of an omnibus bill. It could be part of the next, funding of the government. It can be part of a continuing resolution. I'm not saying it should be attached to those other things, but my point is that I think we have come to believe that 9 justices is somehow set in stone, and that it is somehow to change it would require some extraordinary overcoming of the status quo. And that's just not true. 9 is an arbitrary number. It is not set in the Constitution. It's not even suggested in the Constitution. It was not the original number that the founders settled on. It was a historical accident. And so 13 would mirror what 9 was at the time, which is the number of circuits that there are in the country. So 13 is actually more historically consonant, even though numerically different. It is consonant with the theory behind how many justices there should be. I also want to say that to those out there who are Republicans or are Republican leaning, there are good, sensible reasons to expand the court to 13. The Supreme Court is now overseeing a vast number of cases that come up through the federal courts. When 9 was set, there were just hundreds of cases every year that were potentially before the high court. Now there are tens of thousands of cases, but the Supreme Court is only able to hear 60 or 70 of them every year because of its small size. So there is a good practical, good functioning of government. If you are a business leader who wants there to be consistent and uniform application of the law nationwide, you should want an expanded Supreme Court. So, there really just aren't a lot of reasons not to do it, other than if you are a Republican who cares more about, partisan result than you do about how the court operates.
Totally. Could the Supreme Court then actually shoot down that law, even if it is passed by Congress, and it's signed into law by the president?
No, because the Supreme Court is a function of the Constitution in that there is a Supreme Court justice, namely the Chief Justice, right? The Chief Justice is in the Constitution. Everything else about the federal courts, federal district court judges, how many, what they do, federal courts of appeals, how many, what they do, and the associate justices on the Supreme Court, the 8 justices other than the chief, are all a function of a congressional law. And Congress could repeal the 8 and make it back to 1. They could make it 13. They could make it 27. They could make it 27 and say they sit in panels of 3, and there are 9 panels of 3, right? All of that is a question for Congress, and it is not a question that the Supreme Court could overturn if Congress said it, other than the role of the Chief Justice.
Some moderates have expressed reticence to expand the court because they wouldn't want it to be politicized and they wouldn't want the process to be abused. What's your response to that?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, I think, if you are worried about court abuse, I think, that ship is like no longer in the harbor. It's
We're
not
in
even in the nearest ocean.
Yeah.
Like it is
Yeah.
so far away that it has sailed. Okay. Number one. But number two, and this is the argument I do make to moderates, which is why I said if there are moderate Democrats listening or even Republicans listening, like it is my pitch to you. If we want a functioning judiciary, and forget about for the high profile issues. I just mean for like keeping the courts functioning. The court right now is not meeting the moment. It is only hearing 60 to 70 cases in a system that is generating tens of thousands. So the court needs to be expanded. Frankly, we need more district court judges. We need more court of appeals judges. We just need a bigger judiciary. And so that would be my pitch to the moderates out there.
Yeah, and by the way, a good percentage of those cases are just based on Donald Trump's own appeals. So
well, yeah,
definitely...
right. I mean, he does. I mean, it's funny you say that because yes, the fact is, if you look
it's true though. I mean, it is true that the number of cases that the Supreme Court has taken up just with regard to Donald Trump himself, from back in the 2020 election all the way to today, is completely overrepresented.
Correct. And what that means is that many really mundane issues like how contracts are interpreted, how retirement plans operate, whether or not, companies can buy other companies, things that are not really as ideological, they wind up getting crowded out and not decided by the Supreme Court. So that's why I say there's actually a disservice that goes beyond the partisan. There's a disservice to what's happening right now.
Let's finish off with this. During his first speech after dropping out of the race, President Biden announced his support for Supreme Court reform. What'd you make of that?
I thought it was great. I thought it was, a welcome thing for him to adopt. I candidly wish he had adopted it earlier in his term. I think his instinct as an institutionalist probably got in the way. And also, let's remember he had a big legislative agenda, right? He had a lot of things that he wanted to accomplish, and he did accomplish an enormous number of legislative acts. So he probably thought front-loading this would jeopardize some of that agenda. So I don't fault him for that. But I am glad that he has come around to this position. And it's interesting, Brian, in the time that you and I have been doing this series, we have talked about this issue sort of here and there. And it has been interesting to watch how the center of this issue has shifted. What was once viewed as kind of like a pretty out there idea is now pretty much in the mainstream. A centrist president who's an institutionalist is proposing it. So I think we're having some good on the debate.
Right, and we will continue to beat this drum as much as we possibly can because, in terms of what the Supreme Court has turned into, it doesn't get more important than trying to figure out some solution to the problems that we're faced with right now. Again, for those watching, if you want to support the work that Marc and his team are doing, please sign up for Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.